Welcome to the Exponential Minds podcast. The research, development, launch, and growth of new technologies is creating incredible momentum in the modern world. Join futurist Nikolas Badminton as he talks with the innovators and the exponential minds that are tackling some of the biggest problems and creating solutions that are propelling humanity to the next level.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Exponential Minds podcast. My name's Nikolas Badminton. I'm a futurist. I help my clients look out 5, 10, 20 plus years into the future so that clients can imagine incredible futures today and build resilient business. And today I'm incredibly excited to have a friend on the podcast, Liza Amlani. Liza is a retail industry expert with over 21 years of experience. In her career, Liza has worked with familiar brands including Ralph Lauren Europe and Canada, Club Monaco, Nike, Walmart, and many others. Her experience encompasses brick and mortar, e-commerce, and omnichannel in the areas of product creation, merchandising, and product development. In shifting to consulting, she played an integral role in Accenture's retail strategy group, where she was responsible for consulting with fashion brands and retailers, providing insight on relevant topics, and helping people reimagine the future of retail. Currently, Liza is the principal of her own company, Retail Strategy Group, which is a consulting practice which helps companies in the retail space dramatically improve profitability, which is hugely important in this post-pandemic or mid-pandemic times that we find ourselves in. Liza, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks. Pleasure to be here. I'm excited to talk about my favorite subject, retail.
Yeah, me too. And I've managed to be speaking about this I hadn't really spoken about this to clients over the past few years. And in the last year or so, I've chatted to franchisees, I've chatted to people in retail, I've chatted to, high street associations. It's kind of interesting. But Liza, can you just give us a bit of a rundown of, how your journey from sort of the beginning of getting into retail to where you are today has sort of shaped how things are?
Yeah, absolutely. My journey was long. It is still going. I started on the shop floor. Since I think I was 14 years old. I loved being in retail. I've worked for Aldo and Holt Renfrew and the Bay. So I've been around, and I moved to the UK in 2000. I'm from there. And I, again, was back on the shop floor. I started at Harrods, part of their program for getting into corporate. So I wanted to start my buying career. Instead of going into their buying office, I actually left Harrods, and I was designing for a handbag and luggage company, where my claim to fame was designing all the bags for FIFA World Cup 2002. Super exciting for me, considering I never really watched any football and was from Chelsea and was not a supporter. So that was horrendous, but I had a great time designing the bags for FIFA. It was very fun. Then I actually moved back to Toronto, and I started my buying career, where I was part of Holt Renfrew. Then I was recruited by Caban, which is part of Club Monaco. I bought all the women's wear and accessories for the brand. I also have worked for many department stores like Sporting Life, Sand Stores, which sadly closed down. And then I did a little bit of consulting and styling, realized that I was making no money. So that I'm like, okay, I need to rethink this plan. And then I started to work for Ralph Lauren again. And I was, I think, the third person hired, part of Ralph Lauren Canada, where I was managing production and merchandising for the country. Very interesting, working with different supply chains, 3PLs, and setting up the business here. Very interesting that technology was really painful back then. We could not communicate with the US, and that's why we opened a Canadian office. I moved back to the UK in 2014, where I was the buying lead for Ralph Lauren for Northern Europe for the Lauren brand. So I worked across UK, Ireland, Scandinavia, the Baltics, sometimes France. And then I moved back to Canada in 2018, started my consulting career with Accenture, where I spent most of my 2.5 years with a fabulous brand that I cannot name, but I will tell you that it is, I believe, a $40 billion footwear and apparel company, and they just released a very inclusive shoe last week. And
Yeah.
now I've started my own practice.
Yeah, and I mean, this is really exciting to me because everything's on the floor for disruption in retail. It seems like these days. I mean, 2020 saw an assault on the high street and a shift to e-commerce because we're all locked down. We're all in, sat in our basements working away, or we're not anywhere glamorous really. Well, certainly not the majority of us, right? Even people like Professor Scott Galloway have said that we saw 10 years of growth in e-commerce in about 8 months, which is absolutely insane. It's not only just a shift of revenues, it's a shift of culture in a way, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
how has the past sort of year or so really impacted retailers, but made them think differently about the world?
I mean, that's a loaded question.
Yeah.
But I do think that with that acceleration of technology really brought about retailers that weren't going to cut it. They basically died. And I think that because they didn't invest in technology, there was no way they were going to keep up. And I think a lot of people talk about digital transformation. That's a huge, I think it's a buzz phrase, but what it actually means is not only going online and creating an e-com store, but it's really about merging the experience of digital and physical retail, looking at different ways to talk to your customer, understand your customer, use the data from your customer, and build better experiences for us, on Zoom calls all day, but also, investing in your people. I think it's really that hybrid. You have to also invest in the people that are actually doing the work on the sales floor, behind the scenes. We're seeing that transformation slowly, but I think the customer centricity part of it all is the key to all of it.
It seems to me as well, it's interesting at the beginning of the pandemic when everything shut down, it's like, clearly some people are going to fail here and this is going to be bad. Are retailers even going to develop, clothing lines for the year? How are they going to shift and whatever? But really, we've seen retail booming. Like, yes, we've had to buy online, but we've still seen product working, new products being developed. We're seeing supply chains being, being challenged, but also sort of persevering and getting through, right? And it's interesting to me. So, I mean, in this time, I mean, what advice were you giving to your clients to help them sort of not only get through the tough times, but to prepare for a future?
The one piece of advice that I always give my clients is just really understanding what your customer wants before they even want it in some cases. That's where localization plays such a huge role. Building that sense of community within your local stores, those big department stores like a Nordstrom, opening the Nordstrom local stores. There's a reason for that. It's not only about fulfillment. It's also about, understanding your customer. Look at Nike. Nike's such a great example that I love to give people because they do such a great job in seamless integration across all channels, whether it's their Nike app, being a Nike member. You walk into the store, they understand not only that you took a yoga class through their app that morning, that you're really interested in golf because you keep looking at golf things, but you abandon your cart. That you love running. So, the Nike local live store is a great example of how they're using all those points of data and creating that amazing experience for the customer. So looking at your customer when you're making all your decisions, whether it's buying, product development, product optimization, and of course the customer experience across all channels. It really touches all of those things, and it all comes down to the customer.
Yeah, this is about ecosystems, right? Everything's interconnected than ever before. There's not like the e-commerce team over in the corner and the physical design team over in the corner and the product people in their White Castle in the corner. Like, don't speak to us. We're inventing, we're inventing like season fashions for 2 years
Right.
time sort of thing. It seems like fast fashion is kind of been redefined.
Yes, it is. It is.
Yeah. So
It is.
it's no longer just like from the catwalk to the shops and cheap, cheap goods. It seems like there's been a shift. Have you seen a shift in the trends within retail in terms of how much people are willing to spend, what kind of goods that they're buying, and the such like?
Yeah. I think that people are willing to spend on product that they feel invested in. So, for example, most customers, I would think, are really pushing sustainability across their entire life, whether it's the products they buy, how much energy they use, what they're doing in their homes to better their lives for generations to come, right? So I think sustainability is a good one because they're holding retailers accountable. Investors are holding governments and retailers accountable. So that accountability is directly related to the claims that retailers and brands are making around sustainability and social and ethical ways of working. So I think that there's more investment there. So if a retailer or a brand like an Allbirds, sorry,
Yeah.
is
The shoe company, right? Allbirds.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. They're displaying their carbon footprint on their labels.
Right.
Or Everlane. I don't love to talk about Everlane because they have a lot of other challenges. But I mean, it's great that they show the factories that they're developing their product in. Or there's technology out there that is being used a lot more where customers can actually see where things are being produced, like a source map, for example. You can go on there, you're wearing your Van Check shoes, and you can see what factories and what they look like on source map. So I think that investment, people are willing to spend the money on product if they have an investment and into the beliefs that the brand puts out there and that they're aligned.
It's kind of, yeah, once you get into the mindset of a brand, and I'm kind of new to spending money, a decent amount of money on apparel and clothing. I got to put my hand up, like I'm a sneakerhead. So I buy sneakers. I don't really speculate in them. I just really love, new kinds of sneakers, but I've just started spending, a decent amount of money in clothes. I just bought myself a Rick Owens t-shirt. Right.
Nice.
Right. It was in the sale because I'm not going to spend $1,000 on a Rick Owens t-shirt. Let's be honest. Right. It's kind of insane at the same time, but we've kind of got this interesting world of like haute couture and this responsibility. And, we've seen Patagonia very famously sort of don't buy this jacket. And we've seen people like Lululemon sort of, face up to some of the, sustainability claims of their Luon sort of materials and whatever. And it's been good. This eco movement behind fashion has been good there as well. But what's really interesting to me is the shift towards resale. I mean, they're saying that resale is going to grow twice as fast as new apparel in the next sort of 4 or 5 years. And that, we're not buying new clothes as much as we used to. We're buying, old classics or things that are now seen as trendy. And, the kids are sort of really pushing the boundaries in that. I mean, what have you seen on that side? Because you work with apparel and retailers, people pushing new product. Are they starting to sort of really get on board with this idea of old product?
I would say 100%. I think that the circular economy, as more brands talk about it, I think there's a lot more investment into companies like the RealReal and Poshmark and ThreadUp, but also companies like Levi's. That's a great example. It takes 90 gallons of water to make one pair of jeans. So what Levi's is doing is that they're actually sharing the knowledge of what they're learning around polluting the climate and how they can be more efficient. And they're sharing that knowledge across brands so that other brands also infuse circularity into their business model. We know that IKEA is doing it. I think the news came out in the summertime where they're part of that resale mall outside of Stockholm. there's other companies doing this too. I think Nike is also doing it, where you bring back your, used Air Force Ones, and then they'll repurpose it and they'll put it into development of new product, like the rubber on the sole of the new shoe. So I think that circularity of product and brands and how they're relating what they're doing back into product development for the customer, and getting that customer involved to not only validate the product before it's even made, but also bringing that customer along on the journey by sharing knowledge.
It's interesting. Like, I actually bought a pair of Nike Space Hippies, and the Space Hippies are literally made a certain amount of them by weight. I think it was like 60% of them by weight is actually recycled goods, and the sole is made out of like the offshoots of other soles and things that were faulty and whatever. It's kind of cool, right? I didn't know that example about Levi sharing knowledge, but it kind of. Yeah. It seems like fashion and apparel retail is very much like the people in the laboratory, engineering new things, and suddenly, wow, it's like the first to the post, or the new sort of rebellion of thought sort of hits the streets, and then suddenly like everything changes. We saw it with Vivienne Westwood, we saw it with Gaultier in the 80s and 90s as well. I mean, today we're seeing brands like Acronym and Cavem, and all this like really obscure kind of cool brands as well, sort of pushing forward with classics like Rick Owens and Levi's and all these people. You talked about Poshmark in there as well. I've got a friend down in the United States that she turned around, she said she lives in quite an affluent area of Silicon Valley. And, and her husband's been a friend of mine since I was 14. And so I go down there and I see them, and she's like, she's a mother and she looks after the kids. And she was like, oh, what can I do? And she makes a couple of $1,000s a month on Poshmark, flipping like everything that she finds. And it's incredible. The world has shifted, it seems. So, I mean, what's next? I mean, what's new and exciting, and what's next? Or are we going to really double down on the circular economy and make that the de facto standard?
I think that sustainability and circularity go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So, I think that the one lesson to be learned out of the Poshmarks, the Threadmarks, ThredUp selling on the platforms, and of course, just seeing how much good they do, I think is great. But then what we're not talking about is the overconsumption of the consumer, right, and the overdevelopment of the retailer, and how we cannot see actually what's happening when they're sourcing product. So that supply chain transparency is still such a huge challenge. And I think that as we move forward in the next, I would hope 5-10 years, that we will get more visibility into those remote parts of the world where, unethical ways of working are still so prevalent. And a lot of it comes down to corruption of, governments. And, sadly, traditional fast fashion is, a big culprit there, because, they're making goods for so cheap. They're, the labor costs alone are just, it's shocking. So I think that that's something that's, going to really come out into the open, which will really change the way we buy. So we'll buy less, we'll have products for longer, which is great. We're going to use data to actually build products, not only from like a sampling and a waste perspective, but also using technology like 3D printing or digital twins to show customers the product before you make it, to make sure that this is something that they actually want. And we're also going to, I think, as consumers, will want to consume less. So I think that's going to really bridge that gap between overdevelopment of retail and consumption of consumer.
It's interesting, isn't it, where you've got trends like minimalism, and then I tried minimalism for about a year, and I couldn't wait to move back into my apartment and buy things and have different clothes. And there's a personality around this, and I think that's the cultural element. It's like a representation of who you are. I recently just bought some clothes because, even though no one's going to see it, I need to feel different on a daily basis, right? I watched a movie about 5 years ago called The True Cost, Have you seen that movie
I
about?
haven't.
Yeah. So Indian and Bangladeshi workers in fast fashion and their treatment and that, it really sort of shone a light on that supply chain here. I mean, you've spoken about things like Allbirds saying their carbon footprint. We're talking about, we've spoken a little bit about Patagonia. We've talked about Levi's sharing knowledge and all of that. I mean, how do retailers sit down and rethink who they are in the context of sustainability?
It absolutely comes from leadership. I think once leadership gets on board and they start thinking strategically on how they can manage their business and really understand what the customer wants and pollute less, then I think they'll be held accountable, because they'll be looking at sustainability and circularity and what they're doing to the climate as a whole organization. It is a mindset shift and a culture shift for the whole organization, but it does come down to leadership. And we talk about fast fashion, and I do think that that term is going to mean something different, where we're going to be able to use smart technologies like smart fit and smart sizing to produce less product and produce the right product, so that there's less returns sitting in landfills, and we're delivering the right product to the customer. And it really does come down to technology, but also leadership has to be on board with the messaging that the customer actually wants.
It's also platform as well, even beyond e-commerce, and it's the community. And you touched on community earlier as being a hugely important thing. I mean, Etsy. I mean, what a story Etsy has been. Absolutely explosive growth over the years. And what could have just been a sort of a hokey little, community of makers that sold trinkets has turned into something that's a real powerhouse that's made, traditional retailers think differently about the world as well. I mean, when we speak to retailers and we try and work things out, it seems like the leadership is living in yesterday in so many. I mean, if you look at the story of Topshop in the UK, we all grew up with Topshop, and
Yes.
I mean, how far can you fall and how wrong can you get it? And it all came down to Philip Green and the Arcadia group and the leadership and a focus on profits and not a focus on people, right?
Yes, absolutely. And what's interesting is that with ASOS buying Topshop, it's how are they going to keep the brand, use the data from the customers of that brand. And Boohoo Group, same situation with them buying Debenhams. They're buying the data.
Right.
They're buying the customers, those digital customers. But I think, as we talk about platforms, gaming is such a good one to talk about, where gaming plus the future of retail plus entertainment is all combined. So you look at Design Home, that the game, they're an apartment design game where they're partnering with traditional retailers for digital product placement, like West Elm and Pottery Barn. But they got smart. They actually developed their own private label, so that not only can the users look at all product available, but they can also buy seamlessly without leaving the game. It's actually amazing. I mean, I think Minecraft is going to do the same thing, knowing what they know when partnering with Uniqlo, where they actually have to leave the platform to actually make the purchase, which you could actually lose the customer. But engaging a different customer using unconventional ways of selling, that is really the future.
And it's interesting. I'm glad you brought up gaming as well, right? Kids are spending billions of dollars on things that don't exist, but they do exist in the virtual realm, like Fortnite, or we've got virtual influencers as well.
Yes.
And things that can't or don't exist in reality are just being spawned in these digital worlds. Have you been working with people on like these digital products and those aspects of retail as well?
Not yet. I've been making suggestions.
Yeah.
But I don't think we're there yet. I think that luxury has been incredible on how they have been aligning with gaming platforms like Animal Crossing. I mean, I've never seen it personally, but of course I've read a lot about it.
Yeah.
Where Gucci, Dior, Burberry, they offer their styling and their product on avatars. So I think that that bridge between reality and virtual has has opened so many doors for retail that we just would have never thought of. I mean, with TikTok being a platform for fashion shows, I mean, you would never ever think that was going to happen, but it did, and it was successful.
Yeah, it puts the power in the people and the consumer,
really
and the influencers. Yeah. It seems like every influencer has got merch, right? Buy the T-shirt, yes. Buy David Dobrik's like your clickbait T-shirt, and it is something for the kids to have on the streets, right? And it's interesting. This entire conversation is absolutely fascinating to me. It's one of the most confusing industries I've ever tried to wrap my head around, because it's constantly changing and constantly evolving, and it's very, very difficult. Yeah. So leadership, I would say leadership are on the back foot most of the time, and people like you are like 2 steps ahead, trying to convince them that this is the future, right? How do you convince leadership of things that they just can't understand might be the future?
Yeah. And I think that because of this 10 years of acceleration in retail in 2020, that technology is so in your face that leaders cannot ignore it anymore. Because if they don't get on board and start thinking about new ways of connecting with the customer, working with their retail backend, the staff, the merchandising teams, the people on the floor, and just elevating the experience and really seeing what's happening out there. If they don't, they are going to become the Sir Philip Greens of the world, and they are going to die.
Yeah, and
not saying he's dead, obviously.
Exactly. But like, I always think, does the leadership believe in the product? Do they buy the product? I lived in Vancouver for a long time. Lululemon was there. Everyone wore Lululemon. Everyone got into, running or yoga and it was like a complete encapsulation of that brand. And the brand is going, to new heights of revenues, and, especially during the pandemic. And that, I think that's really interesting. This conversation has been fascinating, from that reality of retail on the high street and e-commerce, but to also virtual, the idea of gaming and platforms like Etsy, Levi's sharing knowledge, platforms like Poshmark completely changing the game in a way. I think that retail, for me, it's so fascinating. And again, like I said, it's very difficult for me to wrap my head around it. I'm a practitioner in terms of being a customer, less of a practitioner like you in terms of working in retail. So Liza, I think we're going to have another conversation in a few months and come back to it and say, okay, this is what we said back in February 2021, and now what we're saying in February 2022. But Liza Amlani, retail subject matter expert, I'd like to say thank you very much for being here on the podcast, and I look forward to chatting to you soon.
Thanks for having me.